I'm going to show you a set of stitches that kind of go together. So this, where we're going to start is the petal stitch. Bring our needle up. Whoops, pulled my thread off the end of the needle. That's because this piece is a little short, but I'm at the end of the thread and I want to use it. So let's thread my needle again. We'll bring the thread up at the base of the shape, and then right next to the base, not in the same hole, but right next to it, we're going to bring the needle back down. Now before pulling this all the way through, let's bring your needle up at the top of the shape, wrap, oh, be careful not to separate the strands on this one, wrap the needle around that on the inside, and then pull the thread. And if you pull it too tight, you're going to get a little straight line. If you do that, just take your needle, loosen it back up a little bit, and try again. So there we go. We pulled it down. It's in the right spot. It's covering up the template on the back. And then I'm going to just take my needle and tuck it right over the top of that stitch. So that way it keeps that little pretty circle shape. Then I'm going to go down here and do the same thing, and we're going to make the petal stitch into a lazy daisy, which is just a set of petal stitches to make the flower. I'm being very gentle as I'm pulling on these so that I make sure I'm not pulling it too tight. We like the look of having the thread sitting on top of the fabric. It gives it the texture that we want, and it's the proper way to do these to cover up the stencil. All right, now I have my little lazy daisy stitch drawn in. So this is done by hand, so it's a little bit wonky, but when you're doing a pattern, these stitches will be even. Now let's come over here to this line. We're gonna use the same concept and make a chain stitch. Now a chain stitch is in the family of a continuous stitch, which means each stitch leads directly into the next without finishing. So I have my little loop here, and just like on the petal stitch, before I pull it all the way down, I'm going to bring my needle back up and use that to support the stitch. Now, unlike the petal stitch, instead of tacking off right here and starting again, I'm actually going to bring my needle on the inside of that stitch that I just made and start the next loop. So I'm using my fingers to hold it and to keep it in the right place. And I am actually, instead of bringing it up on the sides of the line, I'm bringing my needle up directly on that line so that I can make sure that the stitch ultimately covers the stencil. If you make these loops too big, you won't get the stencil all the way covered and it'll show through on your project. Now I'm showing you how to do it if you're using only one hand. Instead of just pulling it all the way through there at the end, you're gonna bring your needle up and loop it through like that. Whoops. Trying not to pull it all the way out on the bottom. So take it up and loop it. Ta-da! It's all done on that line. Now I'm going to take my thread, and just like on the petal stitch, I'm going to just wrap it around the outside and tack it down, being careful to not pull too tight on that or else you'll lose the loop shape. So when we tie this one off, you want to wrap it underneath just like we do on the other back stitches. But because I have this neck shape, I'm going to show you how to do this on a curved line. And this is just to practice. It's the same thing, same concept, but doing it on a curve can be a little trickier. So let's do that together. So we're just going to follow the shape. Now, one thing about continuous stitches that can be confusing is if you run out of thread in the middle of your line and you have to tie it off, it can seem a little scary. But here's how to tie off a chain stitch. So let's say that my thread is too short and I have to stop and get a new piece. Instead of continuing, we're going to make a tack at the top just like we would at the end of the stitch. And I'm going to tie it off. And then once it's tied off, I'll just start again behind that loop. So let's say I have my new length and I'm just going to start in that loop that I ended on. And go again like nothing ever happened. And you might notice that that piece is slightly more bulky, but most of the time it won't be noticeable enough to be a problem. Now I'm going to show you this side. I'm going to make these stitches really close together so you can see how different it looks. So I'm pulling a little tighter and I'm making them a little smaller. When you're tracing text or anything like that, doing these little tiny ones is a good move because you can get sharper angles with the tiny stitches. So that is your petal stitch, lazy daisy, and the chain stitch.